Once again, it's good to be able to bring a lesson to you and be able to speak with you. As mentioned in class, we talked about that there is no other gods. There is only one God, the God who is described in the scriptures. And I'd like to talk about another fact. As Israel, we're going to go back to the time when the descendants of Jacob moved to Egypt because of a severe famine. And within a very short time, they became slaves in that land. If we turn to Genesis chapter 15, Genesis chapter 15 and starting at verse 13, it says, God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, that they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. And yet God promised to rescue them and return them to the land promised to Abraham. And when that time came, God raised up a man named Moses to deliver his people. And we find in Exodus chapter 3, starting at verse 9, now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel have come to me. Furthermore, I've seen the oppression with the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Now Pharaoh would resist God, and that provided God with an opportunity to display just how mighty he really was. And in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 19, it says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, with which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. So the plagues then became a judgment. Now in our reading, I want you to take a look at Exodus chapter 12, and in verse 12, it says, for I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both men and beasts, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. God said he was going to show that there is no other God. He was going to strike not just Pharaoh, not just Egypt, but their beliefs in their gods. Now, Egypt worshipped about 80 gods or more. Okay. In fact, one of the quotes I have says, for beneath and above everything in Egypt was religion. We find it there in every stand, in every form from totemist to theology. We see its influence in literature, in government, in art, in everything except morality. And it was not only varied, it was topically abundant. Only in Rome and India shall we find so plentiful a pantheon. We cannot understand the Egyptian or man until we study his gods. That was from Durant. The Egyptians considered sacred the lion, the ox, the ram, the wolf, the dog, the cat, the ibis, the vulture, the falcon, the hippopotamus, the crocodile, the cobra, the dolphin, different varieties of fish, trees, and small animals, including the frog, scarab, locust, and other insects. They made a god just basically out of everything. Even Pharaoh was a god. Always the son of Ra, ruling not merely by divine right, but by divine birth. As a deity transitionally tolerating the earth as his home. On his head was the falcon, symbol of Horus, and the totem of the tribe. From his forehead rose the serpent, or symbol of wisdom and life, communicating magic virtues to the crown. The king was chief priest of the faith. and led the great processions and ceremonies that celebrated the festivals of the gods. It was through this assumption of divine lineage and powers that he was able to rule so long with so little force. And God proved that he was greater than all these gods. In Exodus chapter 18, Exodus 18, starting at verse 10, so Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, from the hand of Pharaoh who delivered the people from under, and the hand of the Egyptians. For now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it has been proven when they dealt proudly against the people." God proved he was greater than all the gods. So let's take a look at some of these. The first plague that God sent upon the Egyptians was water to blood. In Exodus chapter 7, and starting at verse 20, so Moses and Aaron even did as the Lord commanded. And he lifted up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the water that was in the Nile turned to blood. The fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And the blood was throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, some will state, well, the word blood doesn't necessarily mean blood. It can mean just a blood red color. But even if this is so, the water did change color, and all the fish died. And nobody could drink that water. It was appropriate that the first of the plagues should be directed against the Nile River itself, the very lifeline of Egypt, and the center of many of its religious ideas. The Nile was considered sacred to the Egyptians. Many of their gods were associated with either directly or indirectly with this river and its productivity. For example, the great Kom, who was considered the guardian of the Nile's sources. Hapi was believed to be the spirit of the Nile and its divine essence. One of the greatest gods revered in Egypt was the god Osiris, who was a god of the underworld. The Egyptians believed that the river Nile was his bloodstream. In the light of this latter expression, it is appropriate that the Lord should turn the Nile to blood. It is not only said that the fish in the river died, but the river stank, and the Egyptians were not able to use the water of the river. Imagine the horror and frustration of the people of Egypt as they looked upon what was formerly beautiful only to find dead fish lining the shore and an ugly red characterizing what had before provided life and attraction. None of these gods were able to prevent the destruction of their supposed very realms. Let's take a look at the plague of frogs in Exodus chapter 8, and starting at verse 2. The Nile will swarm with frogs, which will come up and go into your houses and into your bedrooms and on your bed and into your houses of your servants and on your people and into your ovens and into your kneading bowls. So the frogs will come up on you and your people and all your servants. Frogs were naturally present along the Nile. They've always been there. What changed was the quantity of frogs found. Now from Clark it says, in various parts of the East, instead of what we call ovens, they dig holes in the ground in which they would insert a kind of earthen pot, which having been sufficiently heated, they stick their cakes to the inside and then bake them, remove them, and supply their places with others, and so on. To find such places full of frogs, when it came to heat them in order to make their bread, must have been both disgusting and distressing in the extreme. Now, see, the frog was associated with the goddess Hikt, and the wife of the creator of the world and the goddess of birth. Women would wear amulets with the image of Hecht during childbirth for protection. Consider the irony of the statement that the frog invaded Pharaoh's bedroom and even jumped on his bed. And by the way, even involuntary slaughter of a frog was punished by death. So you have all these frogs, and the rule was you can't do anything to them. Even the removal of the frogs would cause distress. Take a look at chapter 8 and verse 14, or 8 verse 12. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord concerning the frogs which he had inflicted upon Pharaoh. The Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, the courts, and the fields. So they piled them in heaps, and the land became foul. They had to carry all these dead frogs, which you weren't supposed to kill, and they didn't actually kill them. God killed them at their request. And now they had to deal with dead frogs, which went right against the gods of Egypt. The next one was lice. In Exodus 8, verse 16, then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, that it may become gnats throughout the land of Egypt. They did so, and Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast, and all the dust of the earth became gnats through all the land of Egypt. Now my translation uses the word gnat. The word is translated various ways. It comes from a Hebrew word which means to dig. Hence, it's probably a critter that burrows under the skin. It came from the earth, which would be a strike against Gib, the god of the earth. It was especially dreadful to the priests of Egypt, for they were required to shave their body hair off every day, including eyebrows and eyelashes, and wear a single tunic and bathe twice a day, so that no lice would come upon their bodies. And here was a plague that attacked the priests, as well as everybody else. And then the next plague, we're going to read Exodus 8, verse 21. For if you do not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you, and on your servants, and on your people, and into your houses. And the houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they dwell. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people are living, so that no swarm of flies will be there, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land. I'll put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign will occur. Then the Lord did so, and there came a great swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into the house of the servants, and the land was laid waste because of the swarms of fly in all the land of Egypt. The type of insect is not actually specified in the Hebrew text. The word flies was basically added into the English translations because that's the best guess they had. Some actually believe it was a scarab, which would be commonly called the dung beetle. These beetles have mandibles capable of sawing through wood and can be more destructive than termites. And notice in verse 24, the statement about it being in the homes of the Egyptians. And again, this beetle was considered sacred to the Egyptians. The scarab would make small balls of dung, which it pushed around. And the Egyptians pictured this as their sun god, Ra. as he pushes, the scarab pushes the sun across the sky. Another more popular belief is that this was the dog fly, was the insect that was being talked about. This fly multiplies rapidly in tropical and subtropical regions, hence the delta with its Mediterranean climate would be exempt. In the fall, by laying its 600 eggs to 800 eggs in dung or rotting plant debris, and when it's fully grown, the fly prefers to infest houses and stables, and it bites both men and animals, usually in the lower extremities. Thus, it becomes the principal transmitter of skin anthrax, which contracts by crawling over the carcass of animals that have died of internal anthrax. Remember the dead frogs? We have all these flies crawling over frogs that died. Maybe God used anthrax to kill the frogs. They pick it up, they're starting to bite people and animals all over. And this is the first plague where God made a distinction between his people and the Egyptians. It's not a natural overpopulation of insects. There's a sudden appearance, and there's a sudden disappearance. And that's more than just a natural occurrence. The flies would not make a distinction based on borders or nationalities. And in chapter 8, verse 22, again, but on the day that I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people are living, so that no swarms of flies will be there, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land, I'll put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign will occur. Think about it. Ever seen a fly that says, oops, sorry, can't cross that border? No, flies don't behave that way. And yet this did. Now, the next plague, in chapter 9, and in verse 2, for if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, and behold, the hand of the Lord will come with a very severe pestilence on your livestock, which are in the field, and on the horses, and on the donkeys, and on the camels, on the herds, and on the flocks. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing will die of all that belongs to the sons of Israel. The Lord will set a definite time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the sons of Israel, not one died. Now, horses and cattle were not the only valuable animal, but they were not only valued, they were also considered sacred, like a lot of other things. And it's commonly believed, as we mentioned, that the disease was anthrax. All the Egyptians used bulls and bull calves for sacrifices if they passed the test for cleanness, but they were forbidden to sacrifice heifers on the ground that they were sacred to Isis. The god Apis was represented by a bull. A bull was selected to represent the god and supposedly had the power of prophecy. When the Apis bull died, all the land of Egypt mourned for him as if they had lost Pharaoh himself. The priest would then travel through every pasture in Egypt looking for a replacement. A calf bearing a black coat with distinctive patches. Now imagine the priest's turmoil with this plague. Not only would this bull have died, you can't find a replacement. And another goddess was Hathor, represented by a cow or a woman with a cow's head. She was the symbolic mother of Pharaoh. The king of Egypt was referred to the son of Hathor. And again, the Israelites' cattle were not affected. This was then followed by a plague of boils. In Exodus 9, starting with verse 8, then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourselves handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and will become boils, breaking out with sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So they took the soot from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw it toward the sky, and it became boils, breaking out with sores on man and beast. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians as well as on all the Egyptians. Again, one of the guesses that many people take for this is that it was skin anthrax. A black abscesses would develop into a pustule. They would particularly be painful, generally affecting the knees, the legs, and the soles of the feet. In Deuteronomy 28, if you're curious, verse 28, Deuteronomy 28, verse 35 mentions a similar plague. And I want you to take notice. Did you notice in verse 11, it says that the Pharaoh's magicians could not stand before Moses? If they got the plague on their feet, the soles of their feet, which is where it's very common, that would explain that. So this was an affront to the Egyptian gods, Serapis, the god of healing, Imhotep, the god of medicine, Thoth, the god of intelligence and medical learning. And then there was the plague of hail. In Exodus 9, verse 18, behold, about this very time tomorrow, I will send a very heavy hail, which has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Down in verse 23, it says, Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth, and the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very severe, which has not been seen in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck all that was in the field throughout all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Now, Egypt is a very dry land. It normally only receives about 2 inches of rain per year. The Bible mentions that the flax and the barley crops were ruined in Exodus 9, verse 31 and 32. That places these events in around the month of January. The plague originated in the sky, which was the realm of Nut, the sky goddess. It was also an affront to Shu, the god of the wind, Horus, the god of the upper Egypt. Isis and Seth were supposed to protect the crops, and they didn't do it. Then there was the plague of locusts in Exodus 10 and in verse 13. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord directed an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled in all the territory of Egypt. They were very numerous. There had never been so many locusts, nor would there be so many again. For they covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate every plant of the land, all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Thus nothing green was left on plant or tree of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. Swarms of locusts is not uncommon in that area. Okay? But they can destroy an entire village's food supply. Yet here's a swarm that covers the entire land of Egypt. Okay? And again, the gods of Egypt are silent. Where was Nepri, the god of grain? Iremut, the goddess of childbirth and crops. Thermutheus, the goddess of fertility and harvest. Again, Isis and Seth were unable to protect the crops. And then came darkness. In Exodus 10, verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, and that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, but all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. Here's another insult to Egypt's entire religion and their entire culture. See, the sun god Amun-Ra, was considered to be the greatest blessing in all the land of Egypt. Their god was supposed to be Pharaoh's father. The Egyptians had many other gods who were also insulted. Horus, the god of light. Ptah, the creator of the sun, the moon, and the earth. Atum, the sun god and creator. Tem, the god of sunsets. Shu, the god of sunlight and air, and a whole lot of more. And then comes the death of the firstborn. In chapter 11, verse 4, Exodus 11, verse 4, Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I'm going to go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn of the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstone, to all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there had not been before, and such as shall not be again. But against any of the sons of Israel a dog will not even bark, whether against a man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Now, like in many cultures, the firstborn was special. The child represented the future generations. The firstborn was the inheritor of the family estates. The death of the firstborn would cause a lot of emotional and even legal upset. And who's going to inherit? This plague was noticeable because it was so selective. Only the firstborn, and so general. The firstborn of the rich, the firstborn of the poor, and even the animals that survived the earlier plagues. It could not have been a childhood epidemic. This particular plague struck at the heart of all the gods of Egypt. As we mentioned before in chapter 12, verse 12. He said, I will go through the land of Egypt on that night and will strike down all the firstborn of the land, both man and beast, against all the gods of Egypt. I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. This particular plague was, there was Meshahenet, the goddess that presided of the birth of children, along with 7 other deities. Mim, the god of procreation. Shelket, the guardian of life. Renenutet, the guardian of Pharaoh and his offspring. God proved his might against every god of Egypt, striking at their very realms, striking at the very things that they supposedly controlled and protected. There is no God like our God. Take a look at Psalm 77. Psalm 77, and starting at verse 11. I shall remember the deeds of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate on all your work and muse on your deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You made known your strength among the peoples. You have, by your power, redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you, and they were in anguish. The deeps also trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth a sound. Your arrows flashed here and there. The sound of your thunder was in the whirlwind, and the lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your ways in the sea and your paths in the mighty waters, your footprints may not be known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And as Jethro observed in Exodus chapter 18, Exodus 18, starting in verse 8, Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the journey, and how the Lord had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. So Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, and from the hand of Pharaoh, who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they were dealt proudly against the people." God proved that there is no other God but him. And as we mentioned, that evidence, people were still talking about it 400 years later. That event rocked the whole world. That is the God whom we serve. That is a God that you can serve if you give your life to him. We serve the Lord with all our hearts, all our minds, and all our souls. I hope you'll think about these things. If there's anyone here today who's not yet a child of God, there's no better time than right now to put on Christ. And for those who are children of God and would like the prayers of your brethren on your behalf, there's an opportunity as well. Once you come forward, we stand and sing the song that was selected.